I am Dean Bushmiller with Expanding Security, and this is policy-based access control. Use or consumption of this material by AI is expressly forbidden. Let's get started. Policy-based access control. I am just amazed that this works. In the early days when I was working with regular access control, like the Microsoft Windows, at that point it was a Windows NT 3.51. When I was working with that, it was just files and permissions. And when I was working with Unix systems, it was just files and permissions, and that's all we really had. And we've got so much more. So we have to look at really what we actually want. So what do we want? Well, we want zero trust. And that's, remember, zero trust is a strategy. It's not something that you can buy. But we want to look at externalized authorization management. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about the cloud there. That's what I'm talking about. We want dynamic authorization management. So when things change in our environment, even in the middle of a session, we want to be able to manage that change. Going back in history, when a user logged in and grabbed a hold of a file in the very early days, when they grabbed a hold of that file and they were reading it, and let's say somebody fired them right in the middle of them reading that file, like when they were logged in, they could still keep on reading the files and doing all the things that they wanted to. So if somebody said, hey, somebody's coming to fire you, you could sit there and go ahead and delete everything that you want to do, and you could crush everything that was going on. Today, we want to stop that kind of thing. So we want dynamic authorization management. And we also want to be really fine-grained about this. But that sounds like an administrative nightmare, and that's where policy-based access control comes into play. It's identity and access management, but it goes deeper than that. And what's really nice is we can, if we set it up correctly, eliminate the need for explicit authorization to individual subjects. I don't have to say, you get permissions to this thing. There's no need to really put subjects in groups anymore. Well, you still have to do that, but you have to do it a lot less, and you have to manage it a lot less because you're doing things based on attribute. This is all determined by evaluating the attributes on the system. That's the subject, the object, the requested operations, and the environmental attributes, which we'll dig much deeper into in the next section. So what are the attribute values themselves? These can be a set or they can be atomic. Atomic means that it's just like on and off, like you are on our network or you're not on our network. But it could be a set, like a whole bunch of different attributes that are in there. For subjects, when we talk about that, that's not only a person, but it also can be APIs and things like that and tokens. So that's non-human identity is also included in this. The attributes of them could be the creation date, like the creation date of the API key, or the clearance, department, role, or the title. For objects, remember, this is your resource type here, and that could be the records, the accounts, the departments, its classification, the sensitivity, the location of that. It could even be the services that are running on that server or the ports that are open. We could get that fine-grained if we wanted to. So we got subjects, objects, actions. Usually that's things like read, write, delete. It could be approve if we wanted to. We can make that approval process go through there. And the thing that changes, which is really elegant, is the environment. We can look at the time, the location, and any of the dynamic aspects of a particular interaction between the subject and the object. There's a trick to this, because if you say, well, we're going to go ahead and measure everything and collect everything, then authentication is going to take a really long time, and the end user is going to get pissed because they have to sit there and wait for this thing to go through its process. This needs to be fast and speedy. The reason why this didn't work in my world in NT 3.51 was because we maxed out the network at 10 megabits. Those were big deals, a 10 megabit switch back then. Your phones got more than that kind of access. When we look at the architecture, there are components that are fitting together. And usually they're like a PEP, a PDP, and a PIP is the three things that you talk about. There is more complicated things out there, but we just start with this. And this equates pretty well if you look at my recording on radius and how that works, or network access control, NAC, you can look at that recording, and that kind of gives us a little bit of a peer into what's going on here. Those same constructs that we use there are the same constructs that we use here. And a lot of the same devices that we use there can also be used here. We start with the PEP, or the policy enforcement point. This is the gatekeeper. This is the enforcer. It makes no decisions. It's like the bouncer at a club. Dumb as a rock, but they know, hey, nobody's getting in unless they wait in line or they tip me real big, right? Okay. But we inspect the request and generate an authorization request. So they say, oh, you want to get in here? Hold on a second. Let me see if you're, and they don't have the list. What they do is they go, is that guy on the list? And then they send that back, and that gets sent back to the PDP. That's the policy decision point. That's the decision maker. That's the one with the list behind the big burly guy at the door. They evaluate all the incoming requests from the PEP against the policy. They query, sometimes, not all the time, but they query the PIP, which we will talk about in a second, to retrieve missing metadata. They can also query the PIP in a multitude of different ways. Don't worry about that for right now. All they do in the policy decision point is they collect up all that information and they go, it's good, it's bad. He's on the list? Okay, I'll let him in. That's, well, hold on a second. Hadn't gotten in yet. Policy and information point. That is the connector of all of this stuff in a lot of cases. That's the database that's out there. It's the source of all the attributes that are out there. This usually is either LDAP or some other database that's out there that can be very rich with attributes. But it also needs to be updated on a regular basis. It needs to be communicated with very elegantly, and it needs to be speedy and fast. So all of that together goes into this process. And that process, well, it kind of looks like this. This is the process here. And let me zoom out a little bit. And down below this, if you're reading the mind map at home, if you're looking at it, what you'll see is the two different steps here. Let me switch this around so it makes it a little bit easier for you all to see. Okay. Up in the corner there, up at the top, that's the requester. That's the person trying to get into the club. And here's the policy enforcement point right here, what's going to take that request on. They're going to format their request correctly for the policy enforcement point, but they're just going to make that request, and it's going to hand it back in here to the policy decision point. Policy decision point is then going to go to an attribute collector that's up there, and they'll see whether there is some extra attributes that need to be informed about this. This could be things that have changed about the requester or the resource themselves. They can also go and download new policies, and that's from the policy store, and they can bring them down. Then they bring all this stuff together and they go, yep, he's on the list. Okay, let him in. And that's what he says. He says, he's on the list. Okay, what we'll do is we'll allow them access to the resource. So we step through each one of those components here to make this work. This is complicated. This requires a lot of coordination, and it requires a lot of modeling to be upfront. Zero trust is not an easy thing to do, and policy-based access management is not an easy thing to do. So what I would say is, for you all, implementing policy-based access control comes with a cost. So first off, it is highly adaptable, and we love that. That's great. It's going to support applications or systems, including dealing with AI, software as a service that's out there. It is going to be problematic for legacy applications and systems that are out there, but that's okay. We'll kind of take that beating to go ahead and make this work. It does have limitations, like computational language capabilities are at a premium here if we have really large policies that we have to download. We have to look at relevant attributes and collecting only relevant attributes. We don't want to collect too much information, because when we query the resource, the attribute server, and the requester itself to find out all this information, that's going to make this policy decision, it's going to make it really, really deep. The speed of collecting these things does become an issue when we have complex policies. That's why we may also partition our databases. That's a database thing. In digitally mature organizations, we're going to have distributed systems, hybrid environments, complex authorization needs. We need to be all ready for that. So the question is, can we do policy-based access control? And should we do it for our organization? And most of the time, the answer is yes.